That Naturopathic Podcast. TNP.
Hello there.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. I'm Dr. Cara Denisio.
And I'm Dr. David Miller, and we hear your frustrations. This show is for you.
This show is for you if you're feeling like your current healthcare strategy is not getting to the root cause or the underlying reasons for your health.
This show is for you if you've been told that you're fine, but you definitely don't feel very well.
This show is for you if you're walking out of your doctor's office with 1, 2, 3, 4, or even 5 medications without any mention of diet, lifestyle, or a long-term game plan.
This show is for you if you've got several specialists taking care of you, but no one is really putting it all together.
This show is for you if you believe that health should be part of healthcare. These problems have solutions.
We know it.
Our patients know it.
And we want you to know it.
Naturopathic medicine is the solution that you need to know about. Okay, we're back with another episode of That Naturopathic Podcast. This is Dr. Cara.
And this is Dr. Dave.
And today we are joined by Dr. Baljit Khamba, all the way from San Diego today. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you.
So Baljit was a classmate of ours. I think, did you start with me and then graduate with Dave, or how did that work? Your two CCNM class of...
I was with Dave actually, but I was a January. So I started in January. Yeah.
Right in between us.
Right.
Good place to be.
Exactly.
So we're really excited. You've been on our list of guests we wanted to have on for quite a long time. So Baljit is an assistant professor at Bastyr University, which is another accredited naturopathic training college or university in the States. And so she's got this really cool perspective of being a professor and teaching other naturopathic students, and also having clinical practices both in Brampton and at the teaching clinic down at Bastyr. But we're talking to you today about, we're kind of sitting a year out from a pretty long journey that you've had. And so we really think that there's a lot of... we're really excited about this conversation and the wisdom and the insights you've had a year out from a pretty hard journey. So it's a big question, but can you take us back and give us a little bit of background and as to what happened about a year ago?
Mm-hmm, definitely. So really it summed up to, I had about a year, so I'd February-ish of 2019, I had kind of had this ongoing lump in my left breast that I felt for a while, maybe about a year, and I'd have I'd palpate it. And being a healthcare practitioner, I kept checking, okay, well, it's mobile, movable, all the typical things that we would do. And I said, it seems to be going and fluctuating with my cycles, with my menses cycle. So I thought, it's something that I shouldn't be too worried about. However, it was starting to come up where it wasn't going away even outside of my periods. So it started to get a bit worrisome. And then I'd been examining a little further, and it got to a point where we knew that it needed further workup. So my husband and I, we left San Diego and went back and for a number of reasons, but we went back home to Brampton, Ontario. And what I ended up doing then was, when we were there, I immediately went for care to go and get it observed. And, thanks to the urgency of my provider, I was diagnosed a week later. We went to the to Trillium at Credit Valley, and the surgeon, she's a great surgeon. And maybe not, and true to being a surgeon, she's wonderful in what she does in her craft. I wouldn't say she had the greatest sort of, bedside manner. She was really abrupt. She was like, right, you have cancer, and this is what we're going to do. You're going to need to have surgeries. You're going to have this. And then my jaw dropped. And at that point, I was just sitting there staring at her, and I don't know what she'd said after that. There was a flurry of surgeries, and it's really big. I don't know if you're going to live, like all these sort of things, which I couldn't really get my head around. And then as soon as she said sort of her spiel, and for me it seemed like it lasted an hour. I think it was only 30 seconds. She left the room, and all I could do at that moment was I just looked and I said, "What the?" And I kind of a bunch of explicits. And I turned to my husband and I just started crying. I was like, oh my God. And this is coming off the heels of my husband's father just passing away from cancer. Not even a year. I think about a year had passed since then. And now we're dealing with me. And And for me, it was a big sort of kick in the gut, because here I was being this healthcare provider who provides health for others, who lived and naturopathic as that. Here I am living my life as a naturopathic doctor, doing all the things that loving my medicine, loving doing all the things that we do as naturopathic doctors, and really making sure to tell others about that and treat my patients that way. And I was the one that got cancer. And, really kind of facing with that sort of impact that I had felt of, how, I couldn't, there was too many things for me to wrap my head around right at that moment. So there was a lot happening. So I get diagnosed. And then, once I kind of cried it out in the hospital, then I was like, okay, whatever semblances of structure I could get, I gathered within myself, and I said, okay, my next step. See, my husband and I were family planning, and now that's going to have to be put on hold. I was like, okay, right. If I'm going to choose to do chemotherapy, I'm also going to have naturopathic medicine on side, and that's what I'm going to be doing. But I know that, I'm going to need to do some sort of fertility preservation before I begin. So in the time that the surgeon was out of the room, I said, okay, well, I'm going to do chemotherapy, and I'm going to combine naturopathic medicine. I'm going to do fertility preservation. I'm going to see, I wasn't sure about surgery yet, because I said, well, I don't know if, and we were deciding to do chemotherapy first before surgery, since that was an option for me being a younger person. So then with that, I said, okay, well, we're hoping that chemotherapy can, with all the things we're doing, because we weren't quite sure of the size or how many tumors there were. At the moment, it looked like I needed a mastectomy, and there was a high chance of it coming back. So in which case I'd need a double mastectomy. And then so when she came back into the room, I said, okay, well, if this is the case, and I laid out those steps. And so then we agreed that I had 2 weeks essentially to get any fertility things I needed in order, but I needed to start chemotherapy right away. And so I did that, and through that process, we were able to save one embryo. We call it little MB, and MB's frozen away in Toronto somewhere for whenever we're ready. So we have that. Then that was sort of and it was good to have, because that was my sort of one of my motivators. I was like, we're doing this for MB. Anytime anything comes around, we're like, we're doing it for MB. So that was sort of the place I was at a year ago. And then, then chemotherapy and everything. Old.
That's I can literally put myself in that room, as a fly in the wall. The weight of, both surgeons' words in 30 seconds, I can't contemplate that. The weight of those words is so heavy. And then the weight of you making those decisions there after just hearing that, it seems incomprehensible. And I mean, that's you who's, let's face it, you are a smart cookie. Like you know medicine, and you know the steps, and you know what happens. And so I'm just even imagining a patient who doesn't have, maybe that's a blessing sometime to have less knowledge. I'm not sure. Love your perspective on that. But I'm just commenting on the weight of the discussion in that room and the decisions you had to make there.
And that's one thing that I do speak to a lot of people about, a lot of patients, is because not everybody knows. And from the research that I had done, and from when I'm speaking to other people who'd gone through similar processing, I'm realizing that not everybody is aware of that fertility preservation. And there's other options. You can also, use medicine to keep your ovaries dormant, and hopefully that's a good option as well for some people. And so there are many options around it, but those options aren't always given. So what I try to do is when I'm speaking, when I'm talking to patients, when I was going to places like Wellspring, which is one of the free services that we have in Canada to go for cancer, for cancer support, I was trying to speak about it as much as I can, so that I said, I utilized all these resources. I made it my job to be a cancer patient and to be the best, and being the people pleaser and the helping professional that I am. I did all the things to make sure my docs were happy, all of my doctors, from the oncology to the naturopathic to my acupuncturist, to everybody. I'm the ideal patient. So I was like a stellar patient in that regard.
It doesn't surprise me you're the top of the class, even as a cancer patient.
I had to be. I was like,
knowing you as a student, that does not surprise me.
So being that, I had to do that, and I have a binder here of all my research. It's tabbed, all my appointments, everything was structured and organized because I made living my job. I was like, I'm going to meditate, I'm going to yoga, I'm going to do my acupuncture, I'm going to do everything I can because this is all I'm doing right now. And I'm not going to do anything else but focus on me because, for me, cancer and not for me, having cancer was a big wake-up call to say, look, you've been giving yourself to others. It's time, and like striving for other things. And perhaps that focus, if I take a mind-body perspective, perhaps that focus back onto myself hadn't happened, or at least it was imbalanced. So now I was like, well, that was my wake-up call, and I'm going to make living my life, so living my purpose. So in that case, I'm going to do all the things I need to do and focus on me for once, or more so, I should say.
So a year later, after like going through all that traumatic stuff and then like living your job, as you said, what's sort of stuck from that period? What's sort of stuck and continues through like day to day now? Because you're back to work. You live, we were talking earlier that you live in multiple areas, you have multiple jobs, you have practice in Canada and Brampton, and you work as faculty at 2 different locations of the university. So now, how are you integrating all the things you learned during that time?
So one part of it, I have to say, like the part of me that likes to achieve and strive is, I can't get rid of that. That's just ingrained. That's just, I try to tame her as best I can, but she is what she is. And so
do you find that's a negative? I'm sorry, just to sit there for a minute. Is that, do you feel like there's, what's the pros and cons, or what's the risk of that, and what's the benefit for you? Mm-hmm. And I'm asking for a friend.
Yes, of course.
Because I might resonate a little bit with that quality.
She said Baljit is the only one who is like probably like visibly more organized than I was in school. And
yeah.
So.
I appreciate that. Well, and maybe it seemed like that on the outside. On the inside, I don't always feel so organized. But in any case, I come from this, my faith is Sikhism, and it has this one tenet of Sikhism called seva. Seva means selfless service, and selfless service unto others. And so, I would constantly be giving to others. And I would have that item of my faith sort of resonating with me and saying, I'm doing this not just for my faith, but because that is who I truly believe, that I ought to be. And so I was doing a lot. I was seeing a lot of patients. I was in clinic at that, before, when I was in clinic, I would all day long, I would see patients. And if a patient wanted me to come in early and that was the only time, I would come in early. If they needed me to stay late and until the late hours, I'd stay late. I'd come in on the weekends. I would do, I gave much of myself. And then same thing when it came to my, when I was at Bastyr, same thing with my students. I would give a lot of my sort of energy to them. And I realized, it's a great thing because it's my passion and I love doing these things. And I really strive off it. I get such pleasure from doing it. And I, feel that's who I am. At the same time, because I wasn't giving to myself enough, I put myself on the back burner. When cancer hit, I had to take a step back and do a few things differently. I was still doing stuff with Bastyr, but I did it on a much smaller scale. I took the summer off completely while I was during chemo, and I didn't fully come back until January. I was doing little bits and pieces of things that I wanted to do. But even now, I had to learn the word no, which is a big one in my vocabulary that doesn't sit well with me, but it was something that I've been learning to do. And I adjusted to doing the things. Not only did I learn to say no, but I adjusted I took a step back and I looked at my practice to say, how is it that I want to practice with my patients? What is it my goal to do to be able to provide for them? so many times when I was seeing patients before, I would say, I'd love to be able to have just one-on-one time with them for a long period of time. So now my practice has changed where I have a very small number of patients, and I follow them through, through a series before I go searching for a new patient. So that's one aspect. And then from teaching and research, I've learned from a teaching perspective to sort of, to understand and to know that I can be there for the students and I can be there for them, but they also they're looking to me as an example of what a naturopath is. I want to make sure that I'm showing them what a good example of a naturopathic doctor is, and that not being able to answer their emails. It might be saying, and I outline those boundaries ahead of time. I say, guys, you're not going to get my phone number. You can email me. I answer my emails during these hours. Otherwise, if it's an emergency, it's an emergency, and you can access whoever you need to. But I'm there for you during these hours, and being present and in the moment for those hours. But outside of that, I need to take time for me so that I can be there for those times and do the things that I do from my heart and from a place of compassion during those hours and be fully engaged. So that's sort of the ways that I ended up changing things around a little bit. And the same thing with my practice. I did it, I have these certain number of patients and I want to give them all of my attention. And then when they've sort of succeeded in their health journey and sort of graduated on, then I kind of go back and see more type of thing.
So it sounds like you're really fostering like quality and presence over quantity of being everything to everybody.
I think so. That, and I have to say, so yes, definitely that aspect, and as well as a bit of taking some of that seva for me. So taking some of those aspects of, the selfless service for myself so that I can be there. And so I can do the things that are important to me. And it could be, something like the art therapy group that I do where I'm not an artist by any means. I feel like 5-year-old children draw better than me. But, the things that I sit there and I color and I create, like the other day we were painting our talisman, and my talisman was a supplement bottle and I'm painting on it. And I mean, it looks terrible, but it makes me happy.
Good.
So how does this seva thing, it's selflessness, fit in with that idea of, I don't know if you learned it I think we learned in health psychology, but that type A person, the type C person, type B. And I know the type C was really loosely talked about. And I mean, we're not clinical psychologists, but the type C was the one who sort of doesn't have as strong boundaries, says yes all the time, doesn't say no all the time. Can you make any links between any of that from your understanding of mind, body, medicine, seva, and your experience?
Yeah, I'd have to say, I definitely thought a lot about it because obviously when a person gets cancer, you look to the why, like, why did this happen? What was going on? Let me reflect back in my life and see. And sometimes we can make associations. Oh yes, I was a smoker my whole life. Obviously I got lung cancer. All right. So there's certain things that we can relate to and understand when there's a higher prevalence or a higher chance. In my case, it was, my paternal grandmother, she had cancer. She died as a young woman of breast cancer in India and before I met her. And then 2 of her daughters had different types of cancers. So one was unrelated, one was an ovarian cancer, but she was a lot older. Maybe it was related, maybe it wasn't. And so essentially, but since then, my father inherited the gene and then he passed it on to me, but nobody else, none of my other cousins, none of the other, aunts and uncles, nobody else had it. And interestingly enough, I'm the one that looks like my grandmother. I'm the one that acts like her. And I look different from the rest of my family, but I look like her. So, essentially I feel like I've sort of embodied what she didn't finish. She obviously still had more left in this life, and I got cancer around the same age she got cancer. And I got to live where she didn't get to live. So, in looking at that, I took that sort of aspect, that genetic aspect, and that sort of aspect of, finishing something that somebody couldn't finish as the energetics or the energetics of that. And I also took in some of the personality, looking at other personality traits. I said, well, yes, as you mentioned, I'm a high achiever. And, unapologetically so. I like this sort of stuff. And the other part is that, I do give a lot of myself, and that perhaps, I link back to, why do I give so much of myself? Yes, I link my faith to being one of it, but that's not the only reason. The other reason could be perhaps, if I was to sit back and sort of think on it, like many other families in Canada, I came from an immigrant family. I was born in Canada, but my parents came from India, and I was the firstborn. So the firstborn in Canada, and to immigrant parents where English wasn't their first language. And so in having that, I was the one that they would put in front of everything. They would say, well, you're the responsible one. You're the one that speaks English well. So whenever any sort of communications needed to happen, I'm the one reading documents. I'm the one that's communicating. So there was a lot of responsibility put on me, and I have younger siblings, and younger, in our culture, cousins are like siblings as well. So I was the eldest, and these were all my younger ones who were looking up to me and asking me these sort of questions. So I would kind of help them out. So there's a lot of responsibility put on me at a young age, which isn't, a lot of immigrant families can relate to this, or firstborns to that. And so I feel like that sort of spread into the personality of that type A and type C, where I've kind of combined those, because I have, if I was to look at it from that perspective, I could see where that sort of evolved from. The other part that I think about is a lot of mind-body medicine, if I'm going to look at the whys. And so another why aspect that I look at is I look at sort of, when we're looking at these mind-body connections, I look to see some of, the law of the spiritual sort of preceding the physical manifestations of something that occurs. So if spiritually I'm sort of, one aspect taking, I'm reliving, or I'm embodying what was going on in the past of a person who was like me. So I've got that part of it. I've got, the aspects that I'm taking from of giving too much of myself, of striving and doing a lot and not maybe resting when I should be resting, and saying no when I should be saying no. Taking those parts of it. And then, that really is a lot of our fourth chakra, which is in our heart, right? And our heart chakra has to do a lot with many aspects of nurturing, such as the breast, right? And the breasts embody things like not just women and sensuality, but they also provide nurturing and caring and nutrition. So all that sort of stuff, I wasn't giving to myself, but I was giving to others. So when I look back and I think to the why, and to not beat myself up, I say, okay, well, this was a good lesson for me to say, this was a sort of a fourth chakra mind-body connection as well, to say, this is something that I need to work on. It was a good sort of realization for me to say, look, you've done great. You're things are great. You've done awesome. Now it's time to take care of yourself. And this is the way you're going to do it, so that you're not, take your type A personality and do something with it.
I love, it's great to talk to you at this stage where you really are reflecting on, some of those whys, and being able to have a little bit of space from that initial shock. I think it's important, and you've mentioned it as we were chatting before recording. I think it's good to acknowledge that you've expressed you've had a lot of anger through this journey, and probably to this day. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Yes, definitely. So, I talk about my art therapy, and I talk about the things that I do, and they're important because now, coming up to, like I said, it's been a year later. This time last year, I was in the midst of chemotherapy, not knowing what was going to happen to me. And now looking back, I get bouts where I'm angry, and I was saying, well, had I just known I just needed to take care of my fourth chakra, I would have done that. Had I known it was going to lead to cancer, or I don't know, or had I known why didn't I look at that lump closely? And so, it's a slippery slope sometimes when you reflect, because you reflect on some of the things and the why, and you have to let go. And so there are moments, and there are real moments where I sit here and I'll have a good day. And sometimes I talk to my husband, and I'm like, I feel like cancer has taken me into becoming a different person, and I'm not the same person. I'm not that bubbly, wide-eyed person I feel like I once was. Now I feel like I've aged mentally and physically, and another part of me is, I look at my body and I was like, this isn't the body I had for 40 years of my life. I don't know this. It needs to be fed differently than my body from before. And it doesn't look like my body from before. I don't have, I'm in menopause now. And I don't have breasts anymore. I have scars, and I have, one side is fake and one side is nothing. And, my skin act the way it used to, 40 years prior. So, I those moments when they hit me, and, I was like, my hair is different now too. And it's growing in. I've never had hair that was this short before, or curly. It's this weird curl now, which I'm trying to figure out what to do with. And it doesn't let me do anything except just this. I have a lot of, I'll have moments of anger. And I have to say, the majority of the time, I'm well and I'm good. And I feel like I work through a lot of stuff, but there are moments where I'm angry. And, through having a great support team has been awesome, because when I'm angry, I don't need someone telling me, just be positive. It'll be like, no, I don't need you telling me to be positive. When I'm going to be angry, I'm going to be angry, and I'm going to do angry things that I do. If I'm going to cry, I'm going to cry. If I'm going to be mad at the world, I need to have a moment and go off, maybe go stomp somewhere, or like color in my coloring book. I don't know, just be angry. But when I'm angry, and I need to express those emotions and know that and have a safe space to feel like when I need to express those emotions, I like to be either by myself or with people. Sometimes I want to witness someone who's close to me, and I want the space. And so through all of this, I've learned that it's okay for me to have emotions that aren't happy all the time, aren't calm and happy. I can be angry. I can be anxious. I can be sad. I can do all those things, and I can be there, and I can have those emotions, and those around me can be like, that sucks. Yes, I agree with you. Let's be angry together, or I'm going to give you the space to do what you need to do, or to feel, to do that. Is there anything I can do to support you? Do you need me to throw a dish or something? Just somebody to do something with me. And so once I've gone there, and once I've expressed what I needed to express, I always tell everyone, I'm like, I don't live there. I don't stay in that space. Because once I've had it and I've released it and had it out, then I feel like then I can be clear-headed and develop the tools that I need to move from there. And so I don't like to live in that space, but I think it's important to have it. It's important to be sad when you're feeling sad, but you don't need to stay there. I feel like I'm okay. I've cried it out. I'm sad. What was that? But now what can I do now? And I'm a doer, right? I create binders when I have cancer. I, do things. So I'm like, okay, I did that. Now it's time for me to do a meditation, or I'm going to do yoga because I love yoga, and I'm going to do things that nurture me, that I love. So I sit back and I go through my list of all the things that I love to do. I'm going to call one of my colleagues or friends or somebody, and I'm going to just sit here and chat. Or I'm going to, here I keep a daily reminder. My husband put this here for me, but I've got a picture here of like my grandparents and my aunts and my brother. And so I have pictures of family, and that looking at them makes me happy. And looking at my grandmother's smiling face, my maternal grandmother, makes me laugh too. So I do things like that. But, in the spirit of knowing that it's okay for me to be upset when I'm upset.
Is that something you had to learn? Like, did you have trouble with that?
I feel like
allowing yourself to feel that anger?
I feel like it was, yes, definitely. Because I think whether it's a cultural thing, like, in South Asian culture, it's not something that we typically express, or being like the eldest, or, whatever it might be. It's not, for whatever reason, it wasn't something that came easy to me. It was something that, sadness and anger and all those types of things weren't something that I, in as far as understanding how to express, it was probably one of my best ones to learn how to communicate across and to work through. Mm-hmm. So when all this came around, it really taught me how to be angry and to be okay with being, I think it's to be okay with being angry. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be all these things, and to know that those things are fine. And it's not, I think as a society, we tend to feel like we always need to move through emotions really quickly, when in actuality, we can also sit in them for the moments that we need to sit in them, and then process so that we can help in the processing of them.
how does the order usually go? Like, do you find you get angry and then sad, or do you get sad and then angry, or is there no real pattern that you've noticed?
There's no rhyme or reason to it anymore. What I find is that my behaviors will tell me that something is going on because it's still something I'm learning. So I'll find that I'll be doing things and saying things, and that make me sort of sit back and reflect and be like, Baljit, what's going on? Let's take a seat. Let's take a moment. And really, this is a good time for a reflection journal and just to take a moment and be like, what's happening in there? And so when I notice myself maybe being like a little, maybe I'm a bit short-tempered, or if I'm being, I probably say, being during COVID times with just my husband and I in the house alone, perhaps I'm a little bit more short-tempered sometimes than I ought to be. And so when I'm being a little bit more so than I ought to be, that's when I'm like, why is this chewing really bothering me today? And so that's when I have to take a step back and be like, okay, what's going on? Is it really his chewing, or is there something else?
Yeah, well, it's going to be maybe difficult sometimes to discern now if you're more direct and less people-pleasing, right? Like, I'm sure people will understand a bit of this. It may sound like you're being bitchy or curt or whatever, or you're just being more direct and less people-pleasing. Like, I'm sure people maybe confuse that. Do you know now what's the sort of difference between the two?
Between being bitchy and being curt?
No, and then just being like, that's sort of like the negative sort of side of it. But on the other side of that is just like, being direct and not like beating around the bush, and being, just honoring your own time and not having to be a people pleaser where you're be extra nice. Oh, that's nice. Well, maybe it's not. Just
yeah.
Is there a difference there?
Okay. I'm gonna let in on a secret that I think anybody who's gone through anything really difficult or cancer may drop this, and we tend to use it as an excuse. It's kind of like the secret thing. Once you're part of this club, this sort of aspect comes into it. And I'm sorry if I've given out the secret, but so once you have cancer, you can use it as an excuse for anything. So if ever and most people know that I've gone through cancer. So if ever I am being like, if I'm being my curt or whatever itself, sometimes people are like, if I feel like people are a bit more forgiving because I've had cancer, they're like, oh, it's okay. She's had cancer. She can say these sort of things. So, you've earned that ticket. Yes. I get a card. I get the cancer card that I play. So I feel like, but that's just our little secret that we joke with. But outside of that, yes, I feel like now it's more being direct than being maybe bitchy or curt, where I feel like I'm, I express what I'm trying to express with intention and with explanation. So if I say, if I am sort of, say with my students or with somebody, if I'm expressing what I dislike or like, I usually have a backing of something, some reasoning of what I'm saying or not. I mean, it's also not my goals to make sure everybody likes me in that sense either. Like if the student doesn't like me, that's okay. As long as they get a good education, as long as I feel like, they're getting a good education and they're doing all the things that's what's more important. Mm-hmm. And if they didn't like me because they didn't do well, that's okay.
You've talked about, as you're here on your year anniversary or around now, I think you referred to it as your sisterversary, and that's honoring the women who have helped you. I'd love to hear about that because I fully acknowledge the power of women, and I'd love to hear how you experienced that through this year.
Definitely. It was one of my big reflections. So I showed you that picture of my maternal grandmother. So she's really the embodiment of the sisterversary who I sort of dedicated it to. When I first moved out to San Diego in March of 2017, I came out here, and then 2 weeks later she passed away. And then a month later, my grandfather passed away. And my grandmother truly represents, a big part of my life. And she's in sort of these sort of collective cultures. She's one where she was the matriarch and sort of overheld everybody. And all my mother's siblings all lived, we all lived between Mississauga and Brampton, and everybody sort of lived within close range of each other. And my grandmother, we called her the speaker because as soon as anything goes to her, it'll go out to the rest of the family within seconds. And I feel like, we can all sort of relate to people like this in our lives. But so she really represented that matriarch for us. And so as a part of that, I was 5 years old when my grandfather, and at that time, my 18-year-old uncle had moved to Canada. So they moved to Canada and they lived with us. And she was someone who I got to experience, because, my parents had already been living in Canada. My father went to university in Canada. So by the time I came around, they had already gotten the whole Canada thing down. But I got to watch my grandparents sort of navigate this new world and be a part of it. So while she was, while they were living with us and while they, and then eventually moved close by to us, I got to see them go through developing their circle of friends and learning what that looks like. So my grandmother was, a true extrovert in every way. And she thrived and lived and loved involving herself within these community of women. And she would always sort of be around the center of women where everybody were her tia or pangia, which means sisters. And so all of her friends were her sisters, and all of the friends' children sort of referred to my grandmother as a maternal aunt, which is Masi. So they all referred to her in that regard. So, I kind of grew up with other family immigrating, I got to see the same thing, but they were the first ones that had immigrated that I got to see. So in seeing all of this, I truly learned about how to value the circle of women that we create. She came from a village community, and so that was sort of that village sort of mentality and community was to create these. And, in a circle of women, you have empowerment, you have knowledge, you have empathy, you have, you've got caring, you've got all these, you've got medicine, you have everything that you need. Sorry, Dave, are within the circle of women, right? I'm sure men have the same thing. But women, in my case, I'm focusing on women. So then in that, I got to learn how, I got to really see that. And I sort of, without realizing, I was sort of building that for myself too, where I had all these circle of women around me. So when I got diagnosed, I called the first few people I called were, mainly our classmates. So I first called one of my childhood friends, and she lived in Philadelphia. And so she lived in Philadelphia, but, throughout it all, she was there with me. So, I called Montre. Montre, sobbed and cried with me when I first told her. And so she really represented some of my consciousness and heart fibers as I was traveling through this sort of cancer journey. And she was there with me during chemo and during my surgery as well. And then I called some of our classmates, and I called a couple of our classmates, and they were really there for me to drive me to appointments, to hold my hand, to do, to consult with me and give me, because, I can't really think clearly when I'm going through this. And some of our classmates really focus on cancer care. So I would, I sought their knowledge, and some of them were there for me to, when I needed to be angry or when I needed caring or any of that sort of stuff. All these people within my community started to come together. So classmates came together, colleagues came together, my family and all of my circles of family all came together. And so it was really wonderful to see how all these people came together. And so one other thing that, immediately after, speaking to some of the people who were within my immediate circle, I also, for whatever reason, felt the need to reach out to my mentors. And perhaps because I've sought guidance in them before, and in this portion now within my circle, I needed guidance as well in my circle. So immediately my thoughts went to, when I was in high school, I had an English teacher who I absolutely adored. And I really saw a lot of the things that I value within myself, I learned from her. I was this shy, awkward teenager who didn't truly know, as many teenagers are. So I was a shy, awkward teenager, but she saw through that, and she had me sort of be involved with things like the drama club, and she really fostered my love of the arts. And as well as I got to see what a strength and a powerful woman that she is, even to this day, and see how she used that use that strength to help to teach others. And so I really valued her. So I sought her help, and she really helped guide me. And then the other one was my music teacher. And from the same school, and the school I went to goes from junior kindergarten, at that time OAC, so it went all the way through. So he's been my music teacher. He was my music teacher from when I was 7 years old up until I graduated high school. And so he's a person who, again, through the arts of like going through the process of like difficult things like sheet music, which was really difficult at times, but he taught me that you can go through things section by section, and eventually it all comes together to something beautiful. So I learned to go through hard things through him. And so, gathering from my mentors, and then I reached out to, our school's mentors as well. So all my mentors from there, I reached out to, and I said, look, I'm going through this hard time. I could really I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just reaching out to you because I'm reaching out to you and letting you know that I'm going through this hard time. And, they would message me and they would connect with me here and there, and it meant the world to me, even if it was just a quick message to say, hey, just thinking of you, hope you're doing well, or how was chemotherapy today, or did you think of this, that sort of stuff. And so it was really great to reach out to those people and to form my communities. And now my community of women also make up men and women. I have to say that my sisters are also men as well. And so, but they also are fit in that wheel of care and of empowerment and of empathy and all those different factors. And so when it came to a year, I sat back and I reflect to all of the people helping me out in all those ways. And it just brings me to tears because I can't even think, the thought of how compassionate these people are and how much they did for me. It really showed me the power of that sisterhood. And so as a result, I've been calling it the Sisterversary, because it's now a realization for me to say this, and it really sort of solidifies that importance and how I want to make sure that I always live my life within the circle of these sisters in anything that I do, whether it's through work, and that's why I see patients in the way that I see patients, is because I try to embody that same sort of smaller method. And same way with my teaching, same thing I do through any sort of guidance or mentorship, is to keep in that same sort of mentality.
Mm-hmm. Nice. We have one, can I ask one question?
Yeah,
or do you have something else to ask?
You go ahead.
Okay.
We're fighting over questions here.
well, I was going to ask you, usually we end with, the one thing that you'd like any listener to take away from this, because it's hard sometimes. There's so much good information that if you just want to sum things up to one thing for people to take away, that you can talk about that. But I was going to give you an option for a different answer or a different question if you want. And the other question was, upon reflecting over a year of this journey for you, what would you say to someone who was in the room, like where you were that first day that you were diagnosed, and it's just the overflow of information, the sort of suddenness, everything about it, like you in the room when you first learned that you'd been diagnosed, what would you take from what you know now and share with that person?
Okay, so I'll answer that question, because I think the other one I feel like I answered with the Sisterversary part.
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I feel like, and I thought about that quite a bit. Like if I was to go through that all over again, or if somebody else was in that same situation, what would I want them to know? And honestly, all I can come back to, and everything that I keep thinking about, is just a big hug, and to let them know that I'm there. Because cancer can be such a lonely road, but it doesn't have to be. Whether you have cancer or the threat of cancer or anything that you've gone through a hard journey, knowing that there's somebody else, even if they haven't gone through the exact same thing, but are there to give you space and to give you a hug, to envelop you, and to say, I'm here with you. And whatever you do is okay, but I'm here with you. I feel like that's the most important thing, because that's the only time where I didn't feel alone, was when somebody would just give me a hug and say, okay, I'm here with you, whether it's happy, sad, whatever it is, it's okay. And even if they don't know at all, because they haven't gone through the same thing, it doesn't have to be that way. It's just knowing that someone is there. That's and giving and being there with them was probably the best thing that I could probably go through, because going through it utterly alone is a difficult place to be.
And I love that for someone who is so, geeky and has your binder. Really?
The exact same thing.
Yeah. So someone's so geeky and you have your binders and you're on it and okay, here's the plan, here's the plan, here's the plan. But the most important thing is the connection and the presence of somebody else.
Exactly. Absolutely. And hey, I'd have to say that was probably one of the best things that, to go through in that regard, because it really made me realize that, yes, all the organization, all the, the super structured ways that I have things, those are all great. Those are the sidelines. But the most important thing is to know that you have connection.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
I think that's a great way. I think that's an awesome way to end. And I've loved our conversation. And thank you for sharing it with us.
Likewise, this has been great.